Kale Anders had been exploring the alien planet for weeks, mapping strange terrains and studying unusual creatures. The planet was unlike anything humans had ever seen. The sky glowed with swirling green and purple auroras, and jagged cliffs rose like frozen waves from the ground. Strange creatures roamed freely, but none were as terrifying as the dragons he had heard about from previous reports. These dragons were massive, covered in scales that shimmered in the strange light, with eyes sharp enough to spot movement from miles away. Kale moved carefully along a cliff edge, scanning the rocky terrain below. He carried only a small backpack with basic tools, a scanner, and a communicator that barely worked on this world. Every step he took echoed in the hollow rocks. He had always been careful, patient, and observant, traits that helped him survive on distant planets before, but today he had a feeling something was different. He could feel eyes watching him. Suddenly, the sky flickered, and a sharp beam of light shot down from above. Kale barely had time to react before a strong force lifted him off his feet. He felt his body stiffen as an invisible field trapped him in the air, lifting him toward a hovering alien ship. The ship was sleek, metallic, and unlike anything Kale had seen. Its surface reflected the strange auroras and sharp angles, and small creatures he guessed were aliens observed him from the windows. Kale struggled, testing the force that held him. No matter how he moved, it didn't release. The aliens had him completely trapped. He could hear their voices faintly through the air, mocking him in a language he could not understand. Their laughter echoed inside his head, as if they had already decided he was weak and powerless. Kale gritted his teeth, refusing to show fear. Humans might be small compared to these aliens, but he had something they had not counted on: intelligence, patience, and the ability to think in ways they could not predict. The aliens lowered him gently onto a cliffside, but Kale's heart sank when he saw where he had been placed. The ledge was narrow, steep, and littered with massive, sleeping dragons. Their scales shimmered in shades of red, green, and gold, and smoke drifted lazily from their nostrils. Their eyes were closed now, but Kale knew that when they woke, they would be dangerous. The aliens had left him here deliberately, sure that he would not survive the night. Kale took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Panic would be useless. He scanned the dragons carefully, noting their positions, the direction of the wind, and the terrain around him. He realized that the aliens had underestimated him. They assumed the human size and strength meant helplessness, but Kale knew he had something more important: the ability to observe, learn, and adapt. He looked around for anything he could use. Small rocks, pieces of broken branches, even the strange mineral deposits on the cliff could be turned into tools. Kale picked up a few stones, testing their weight, and began thinking about how he could protect himself if a dragon woke nearby. He knew it was risky, but staying frozen in fear would be worse. The aliens might have thought humans were fragile, but he was about to prove them wrong. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cliffs, one of the dragons stirred. Kale froze, watching its massive head lift slowly. Its eyes opened, bright and intelligent, scanning the cliff with curiosity rather than aggression. It sniffed the air, and Kale could feel its awareness, almost like it was studying him. He did not move. He remembered everything he had learned about observing animals on other planets. Sudden movements provoke attack. Patience can create opportunity. The dragon let out a low growl, and Kale adjusted his position slightly, careful not to make it think he was a threat. His mind raced, thinking of ways to use the terrain to his advantage. If the aliens thought placing him here would be easy, they were wrong. Humans could think in ways other species could not predict. Kale's eyes scanned the cliffside for ledges, crevices, or anything that could help him move quietly if the dragon approached. Night fell quickly, and the temperature dropped. Kale shivered, but he refused to waste energy on fear. Instead, he focused on learning the dragon's behavior. They were massive and dangerous, but they were not mindless. Each movement, each shift of weight, each flick of a tail told a story. Kale took mental notes, preparing strategies in his mind. He could create distance, hide behind rocks, and even use small noises to distract them. Survival was not impossible. It just required careful thought. The aliens watched from their ship above, confident that their trap was working. Kale could feel it, even from this distance, the way the ship's energy pulsed around him. They had mocked humans, believing size and strength were everything. They did not understand that humans had something more unpredictable: ingenuity. Kale smiled faintly. He had faced impossible situations before, and this was just another challenge. Suddenly, a small dragon shifted closer to him, its scales catching the moonlight. Its eyes were wide and bright, studying him curiously. Kale held his breath, slowly picking up a small rock and tossing it gently a few meters away. The dragon's head followed the rock, momentarily distracted, giving him the space to move slightly back toward a small crevice. Every small action counted. Every movement had to be precise. Humans survive by thinking faster than predators and adapting better than expected. Hours passed, and Kale continued to observe and adapt. He experimented with small gestures, testing the dragon's reactions, learning their limits. He realized he could not fight them. He was too small, but he could survive by outthinking them. His mind raced with plans, imagining ways to use the cliffs, the winds, and even the aliens' arrogance against them. They had set the trap, thinking he would panic, but he was learning, strategizing, and preparing. By the time the first light of dawn touched the cliffs, Kale had a clearer understanding of his situation. He was trapped among dragons, yes, but he was not powerless. The aliens had underestimated humans. They had assumed strength and size were everything, but they had ignored the unpredictability of the human mind. Kale knew that if he stayed calm, observed carefully, and used every tool available, he could survive the trap they had set. He crouched in the shadows, watching the dragons and the alien ship above. He felt a strange sense of excitement mixed with fear. This was dangerous, yes, but it was also an opportunity. The aliens thought they had won. They thought humans were fragile and weak. Kale smiled faintly, already imagining the ways he could turn this situation to his advantage. The dragons shifted again, and Kale held perfectly still. He had survived countless challenges before, but this was unlike anything he had faced. The aliens had mocked him, trapped him, and left him among creatures they believed would end him. But Kale had one advantage they had not counted on. He was human, and humans were clever, adaptable, and unpredictable. He whispered softly to himself, "They think this is the end. They don't know what I'm capable of." The dragon's eyes followed him, curious and intelligent, but not yet hostile. The trap had been set, but Kale's mind was already working on the first steps of escape. Survival, he knew, would come from careful thought, courage, and a kind of ingenuity that no alien could anticipate. And somewhere deep inside, Kale felt it. This was only the beginning. The aliens might have mocked him, but he would show them just how mysterious and capable a human could be. Kale woke to the sound of wings flapping and low growls echoing through the cliffs. The dragons had moved while he slept, their massive bodies shifting with surprising grace. He stayed very still, pressing himself against a rocky wall of the cliff, observing every motion. Humans were smaller than these creatures, but Kale knew that careful observation and clever thinking could keep him alive. He took stock of what he had. His backpack was light, but contained basic tools: a small knife, a few metal rods, a rope, and a compact scanner. Nothing compared to the dragon's strength, but his mind was sharper than any beast. Kale knew that survival meant using brains over brawn. Every detail of the dragon's behavior could become an advantage if he paid attention. The closest dragon lowered its head, sniffing the air. Its eyes were sharp and intelligent, not mindless. Kale remembered something he had learned from studying animals back on Earth. Creatures often react predictably to patterns. He slowly picked up a small rock and dropped it several feet away. The dragon's gaze followed the sound, giving Kale just enough time to shift closer to a small ledge above. Once he reached the ledge, he crouched and scanned the area. The cliffs were jagged and dangerous, but they offered him places to hide, pathways to escape, and vantage points to watch the dragons. He noticed that they tended to follow certain paths when they moved, probably because of the way the wind carried scents and the natural lines of terrain. He committed each path to memory. Humans might be small, but they could learn patterns faster than many creatures. Kale needed food and water. The cliffs had some vegetation and small streams, but reaching them meant crossing dragon territory. He observed one dragon closely, noting its movements and when it rested. Timing was everything. When the dragon curled into a ball to sleep, Kale ran quickly along a safe path, gathering small edible plants and water from a rock pool. His movements were slow and deliberate, careful not to draw attention. Hours turned into a full day as Kale continued to study the dragons. He learned their habits, which dragons were aggressive, which were curious, and which simply ignored their surroundings. Some would sniff the air and move on, while others followed sounds carefully. Kale realized that he could use this knowledge to his advantage. He began planning small traps and distractions, using stones, sticks, and even his rope to redirect the dragon's attention if needed. One evening, a dragon approached him directly. Kale froze. Its eyes were bright and calculating, and its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air. He remembered the patience that had kept him alive on other planets. Quick movements could trigger an attack. Slowly, he reached into his pack, pulled out a metal rod, and gently knocked it against a rock farther away. The sound echoed, drawing the dragon's attention. It shifted its gaze, and Kale slowly moved backward to a higher ledge. The dragon followed the sound for a few seconds, then lost interest. Kale realized that he could manipulate their attention. He could distract them, guide them, and even create small zones of safety. His human brain, with its ability to plan, improvise, and think ahead, gave him an advantage that the aliens had not anticipated. They had assumed dragons plus humans would end in failure, but they had ignored the adaptability of the human mind. The night was cold, and Kale built a small shelter among the rocks. He tied ropes and sticks to create a crude barrier, not to keep dragons out completely, but to make them hesitate if they approached. He ate some of the plants he had gathered and drank from the stream. Every bite and sip felt like a small victory. He was alive, and he knew he could stay alive. Humans had a stubbornness, a persistence, and an ability to learn quickly that made them dangerous in ways stronger creatures could not predict. The next morning, Kale continued exploring the cliffside. He noticed unusual marks in the rocks, claw scratches, old scorch marks, and faint patterns that suggested previous creatures or perhaps even other visitors. He could not be certain, but the markings gave him more information about movement, behavior, and safe zones. He realized that observation alone could protect him as much as any weapon. Kale also started experimenting with simple tools. He tied ropes to rocks to create small alarms or distractions. He used his knife to carve small notches in the cliff to mark safe paths. The dragons were powerful, yes, but they were predictable when observed carefully. Every human step he took was deliberate, careful, and informed by intelligence rather than brute strength. As days passed, Kale noticed something remarkable. One dragon, smaller than the others, seemed curious rather than threatening. It watched him from a distance, tilting its head as if trying to understand him. Kale remained still, showing no signs of aggression. Slowly, he began testing gestures, small movements that would signal he was not a threat. The dragon responded subtly, moving a little closer without showing hostility. Kale smiled to himself. If he could build even a small understanding with one dragon, it might give him leverage. Humans had an ability to communicate through gestures, sounds, and subtle cues in ways many species could not comprehend. He could survive among dragons not by fighting them, but by learning, adapting, and understanding. The aliens above must have been watching, expecting him to fail. They assumed humans were fragile and predictable, but Kale was proving them wrong. Day by day, he was learning, surviving, and even beginning to influence the dragon's behavior. He knew that patience, intelligence, and careful observation could accomplish what strength alone could not. By the end of the week, Kale had established routines. He could move across the cliffs with minimal risk, gather food and water, and create distractions if dragons approached. He even managed to map the dragon paths in his mind, anticipating their movements hours in advance. He was no longer simply trapped. He was adapting, surviving, and turned the aliens' trap into a proving ground for human ingenuity. One evening, as the sun set and the auroras painted the sky in brilliant colors, Kale crouched behind a rock, watching the dragons settle for night. His mind worked ahead, imagining escape routes, tools he could make, and ways to signal the aliens that he was not defeated. He had survived every challenge so far, and he knew he could survive the next. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "They think I'm weak. They don't know what humans are capable of. The dragon stirred nearby, but Kale remained calm, observing and planning. He knew that survival was not just about hiding. It was about thinking faster, planning better, and being smarter than any opponent, dragon or alien. The cliffside was dangerous, the dragons unpredictable, and the aliens mocking from above. Yet Kale felt a strange thrill. Humans had a talent for turning impossible situations into opportunities. He was small, alone, and trapped, but he was also clever, observant, and resourceful. The aliens had underestimated him, and he intended to prove them wrong. By nightfall, Kale settled into a small crevice, the stars reflecting in the dragon's eyes. He had survived another day, learned more about the dragons, and taken another step toward outsmarting both the beasts and the aliens. Humans were unpredictable, adaptive, and patient, and Kale embodied all of these traits. He was alive, he was learning, and he was preparing for the next challenge. The desert cliffs were quiet now, but Kale knew the adventure was far from over. The dragons were powerful, the aliens were watching, and danger lurked everywhere. But he had one advantage no one could match: a human mind, clever, patient, and relentless. And with that, he whispered again, "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. Kale had survived the dragons for days, learning their patterns and habits. But he knew the aliens were watching from their ship above. They had mocked him when they trapped him on the cliffs, assuming that dragons in isolation would be enough to destroy a human. They did not understand that humans could think in ways that no alien could predict. Kale was small, yes, but his mind was sharp and patient. He crouched behind a jagged rock, scanning the cliffs and the dragons below. One of the smaller dragons moved toward a ledge, its scales glittering in the sunlight. Kale stayed perfectly still, analyzing its steps and tail movements. He noticed that the dragons responded to sudden sounds, lights, and vibrations. They were intelligent but predictable when observed carefully. This gave him an idea. Kale gathered some stones and tied them to pieces of rope he had found. He set them near a narrow path the dragons frequently used and attached them to small notches in the rocks. He tested a small rock by flicking it, and it rolled down the path with a soft clatter. The dragon followed the sound, leaving a section of the cliff temporarily empty. Kale moved quickly and silently, climbing higher to a safer ledge. The first small trap worked perfectly. The next challenge was the aliens. They floated above in their sleek ship, confident that a human among dragons could not survive, let alone think strategically. Kale observed their ship carefully. It used a type of scanning beam to monitor his movements, but the beam had a rhythm, moving in predictable sweeps across the cliffs. Humans could detect patterns and exploit them. Kale marked the sweep intervals in his mind and waited for the right moment. When the scanning beam moved away, Kale carefully approached a small outcrop of rocks. He adjusted his rope and stone system, creating multiple triggers that would produce noise, misdirecting the dragons and confusing the alien sensors. He took a deep breath, knowing the aliens expected hesitation. But he had learned patience. He was a human, and humans could plan ahead, improvise, and react faster than the aliens anticipated. He released a small stone, and it clattered down the cliffside. The closest dragon shifted toward it. Curious, the others followed the sound instinctively. Kale seized the opportunity, moving behind a larger boulder. He noticed a small section of cliff that was less monitored by the alien scanning beams. He could use it to climb higher and gain a vantage point. Step by careful step, he moved, never rushing, always calculating. Hours passed as Kale continued testing the aliens' patterns. He discovered that the scanning beam only swept at certain intervals and had blind spots. He also learned that the aliens rarely adjusted their focus based on his subtle movements. It was arrogance, he realized, that made them vulnerable. Humans had an ability to see weaknesses that others ignored. Kale smiled faintly. He was not only surviving, he was learning how to control the situation. By evening, Kale had built a system of small traps and distractions. Stones, ropes, and minor shifts in rocks created noise and movement that kept the dragons busy. The aliens above could see him, but they could not predict which way he would move next. Every action was calculated, using intelligence rather than strength. He felt the thrill of being underestimated. The aliens thought they had a fragile human, but they had ignored the power of human ingenuity. Kale tested another trick. He climbed to a ledge and dropped a small rock carefully onto a metal plate he had found earlier. The clang echoed down the cliffs, and the dragons all turned toward the sound. Kale took a few steps forward, reaching a narrow path that allowed him to gain a higher vantage point. He watched the aliens' reactions, noting their frustration. They could not predict his moves because he thought differently from them. Humans were unpredictable in ways that technology could not always account for. As night fell, Kale realized he had an advantage that no one had considered: time. The aliens had left him on the cliffs, assuming he would panic, make mistakes, and eventually fall victim to the dragons. But humans could endure, learn, and adapt. He felt a sense of pride. They had mocked him, but their arrogance had created the very conditions that allowed him to outthink them. He crouched in a small crevice, planning his next moves. Kale needed to reach a better position where he could escape or signal the dragons if necessary. He studied the terrain carefully, observing the patterns he had memorized: the dragons' paths, the sweep of the alien scanners, and the safest zones of the cliffs. He realized that combining observation, careful timing, and small manipulations could allow him to move freely without detection. The first hours of the next day were critical. Kale prepared a series of small diversions, dropping stones, shifting rocks, and using shadows to confuse both dragons and alien sensors. He moved with precision, never drawing attention to himself, yet gradually gaining height. He felt a strange satisfaction. Humans had always survived in harsh environments by thinking creatively. Now he was proving it in the most dangerous situation imaginable. One moment, a dragon noticed him and let out a low growl. Kale froze, remaining perfectly still. Then he tossed a small stone a few meters away. The dragon's gaze followed it, and Kale moved quickly to another hiding spot. The aliens above monitored the movements, but could not interpret the subtle patterns he had created. They had assumed he would act predictably, but human thinking was different. Humans could improvise, adapt, and manipulate situations in ways no other species expected. By nightfall, Kale had reached a ledge closer to the alien ship. He could see the sensors clearly now and realized he had enough information to plan a full escape. He even noticed weaknesses in the containment systems they had used to trap him. They were precise, yes, but rigid. They could detect force and movement, but not subtle thinking. Humans could exploit that. Kale felt a surge of confidence. He crouched, observing the aliens and the dragons, and whispered to himself, "They think they control everything. They don't know what humans are capable of." The dragon stirred nearby, curious but not threatening. Kale had learned to use patience and observation to create temporary alliances with them. If needed, he could guide them indirectly using small sounds and movements, creating distractions that no alien technology could predict. Kale realized that survival was no longer just about hiding. It was about using his mind. He had learned the dragon's habits, the aliens' weaknesses, and the terrain. He had turned a trap into an advantage. The aliens assumed he would fail, but humans were clever, adaptable, and unpredictable. He was ready for the next step, using everything he had learned to outwit the aliens completely. By the end of the third day, Kale had mapped a complete plan in his mind. Small traps, precise movements, and clever use of the dragon's behavior would allow him to gain control of the situation. He would not fight with brute force. He would fight with intelligence, patience, and strategy. Humans had survived countless impossible challenges by thinking differently, and now Kale was about to prove it once again. As he settled into a small crevice of the night, Kale felt a sense of calm. The dragons were nearby but distracted. The aliens were frustrated and observing, and he had created opportunities the others had not considered. He had outwitted them without needing strength, without needing weapons, simply by using the one advantage humans always had: their minds. The cliffs were quiet now, but Kale's thoughts raced. Tomorrow, he would take the next step. The aliens had trapped him, thinking they had the upper hand. But Kale knew something they did not. Humans were capable of more than anyone expected, and with patience, cleverness, and careful observation, he could turn a trap into triumph. Kale had survived the dragons and outwitted the aliens for days, but he knew the real challenge was about to begin. He had watched the creatures, learned their patterns, and even created distractions to confuse the aliens. But the cliffs still held secrets he had not yet uncovered. Something in the way the dragons moved, The way the wind shifted and the way the aliens observed suggested there was more to this planet than he had first realized. One evening, as the sky glowed with green and purple auroras, Kale noticed a faint shimmer near the edge of a high cliff. Curious, he climbed carefully toward it, testing every step so as not to alert the dragons below. The shimmer was subtle, almost like a reflection, but he could tell it was not natural. When he reached the spot, he discovered a small crystalline device half buried in the rock. It pulsed faintly, and strange symbols glowed on its surface. Kale's mind raced. This was alien technology, but it seemed connected to the dragons. He examined the device closely. It emitted a low hum, almost musical, and the symbols changed when he moved his hand nearby. Kale realized that it was not just a scanner or a sensor. It seemed to communicate. He remembered the dragons' subtle gestures, the tilting of their heads, the curling of their tails, and wondered if the two were connected. Maybe the aliens had left a way to control the dragons. Or maybe the dragons had their own intelligence beyond what the aliens knew. Kale studied the device for hours. Slowly, he began experimenting with gestures and subtle movements. He mimicked some of the dragon behaviors he had observed: a tilt of the head, a sweep of the arm, a pause in movement. To his surprise, one of the smaller dragons reacted immediately. It shifted closer, watching him with bright, intelligent eyes. Kale froze, realizing he had discovered something extraordinary. The dragons could understand him, or at least respond to human signals. The aliens above would have been shocked if they could see this. They had assumed dragons were mindless beasts, tools to punish humans. But Kale realized that humans had a unique advantage. Not only could they think, adapt, and plan in unpredictable ways, but they could also connect with other species using observation, empathy, and intelligence. Humans could communicate without words, using patience, gestures, and understanding. Kale tested his theory carefully. He moved slowly, using small gestures he had learned from observing the dragons. The smaller dragon approached closer, tilting its head, sniffing the air, and finally lowering itself slightly in what Kale interpreted as trust. His heart raced. If he could communicate with one dragon, he could learn to guide others indirectly, without aggression. Humans had always excelled at forming alliances with nature, and now he was proving it again on an alien world. Over the next few hours, Kale experimented more boldly. He combined gestures, subtle sounds, and movements of the crystalline device. Gradually, more dragons responded. Some shifted to safer areas. Some remained curious but cautious, and a few followed his lead silently. Kale felt a surge of hope. He could survive not only by hiding and tricking the aliens, but by working with the dragons themselves. The aliens had never considered that humans could form bonds with creatures they thought uncontrollable. As night fell, Kale observed the alien ship hovering above. The beings inside were monitoring him, expecting confusion or panic. They did not realize that it had uncovered a hidden layer to the situation. The dragons were intelligent allies, and humans could exploit understanding and strategy rather than strength. Kale felt a sense of triumph. He was no longer simply trapped. He had discovered a power they had ignored. He spent the next day refining his techniques. He learned which gestures the dragons responded to most strongly, how the crystalline device amplified signals, and how to anticipate the dragons' natural movements. By evening, he could guide them subtly, keeping them calm and even leading them away from dangerous paths or alerting them to distractions he created for the aliens. Humans were small, yes, but they could influence and adapt in ways the aliens could never fully predict. Kale realized the true mystery of the planet. The dragons were not just beasts. They were intelligent creatures capable of understanding, reacting, and cooperating with humans. The aliens had treated them as weapons, tools, and obstacles, but humans could form partnerships based on observation and empathy. He felt a deep sense of awe. Humans might be small, but their adaptability and intelligence allowed them to uncover secrets that no other species could. By night, Kale had established a delicate communication with several dragons. They would respond to his gestures, follow his guidance when necessary, and even help him create distractions or manipulate terrain without ever needing to attack. The aliens above must have been growing frustrated. They had assumed a human alone could not survive among dragons. Yet Kale had discovered a new dimension: cooperation. Kale sat on a high ledge, the auroras reflecting in the dragon's scales below. He studied the crystalline device, the cliffs, and the movements of the creatures. He realized that he had uncovered not only the secret of survival, but the secret of influence. The aliens had underestimated humans completely. Humans could observe, understand, and manipulate situations in ways that no alien technology could account for. He whispered to himself, "They think dragons are weapons. They don't know humans can be friends, leaders, and strategists at the same time." The dragon stirred, responding to the gentle signals he sent. Kale felt a strained connection with them. Humans had always survived by using intelligence, cooperation, and empathy, and now he was doing it on a level no one else could imagine. Kale also discovered something else in the crystalline device. It contained records. Faint symbols and images revealed the aliens' previous attempts to control the dragons, their failures, and even hints of other human explorers who might have faced similar challenges. He realized that humans had a unique capacity, learning from mistakes, improvising solutions, and adapting faster than others. This was a power the aliens had never accounted for. By the fourth day, Kale had a plan. He could use the dragons to create distractions, guide his movements, and even manipulate the alien sensors from above. He was small, yes, but he was clever, resourceful, and patient. Humans had always excelled in survival situations, not by strength, but by intelligence and adaptability. Kale felt a quiet confidence that no alien, no matter how advanced, could shake. That night, as the auroras danced across the sky and the dragons rested nearby, Kale realized something profound. The aliens had mocked him, trapped him, and assumed humans were weak. Yet humans were capable of something the aliens could not predict: understanding, cooperation, and clever strategy. He smiled faintly. The trap had been set, but Kale had uncovered the mystery of the dragons and the secrets of the planet. He was no longer just surviving. He was preparing to turn the situation entirely in his favor. He whispered again, "They thought this was impossible. They have no idea." The dragon stirred, responding gently to his signals, and Kale felt the thrill of possibility. The aliens had underestimated him, but it revealed the true power of a human mind. He was small, clever, and mysterious, and the dragons had become part of his plan. Kale laid down for a brief rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring the next step. He had survived, outwitted the aliens, and discovered the mystery of the dragons. Humans were unpredictable, adaptable, and capable of understanding creatures and technology in ways that no other species could. The challenge was far from over, but Kale knew one thing clearly. He was ready for whatever came next. Kale woke with the first light of dawn. The cliffs bathed in soft green and purple glow from the planet's auroras. The dragons stirred nearby, curious but calm. For the first time, Kale felt a sense of control over the situation. He had survived the trap, learned the dragon's behaviors, and discovered the secrets of the crystalline device. Now it was time to act. The alien ship hovered above, its sensors sweeping the cliffs in a slow, predictable pattern. The aliens inside were confident, assuming that the human was still trapped and vulnerable. They did not understand that Kale had discovered something they could not anticipate. Humans could think, adapt, and strategize in ways that no alien technology could fully predict. Kale signaled subtly to the dragons. The smaller ones moved quietly along safe paths, guided by gestures he had learned they could understand. The larger dragons watched, their attention on the cliffs, but not aggressive. Kale realized that if he used them wisely, he could create distractions and manipulate the aliens' perception without ever confronting the dragons directly. Humans were clever, resourceful, and patient. This was his advantage. He gathered small rocks and tied them to ropes, setting up a system of diversions along the cliffs. A few clatters here, a shifted stone there, and the dragons would investigate, drawing attention away from his actual movements. Kale's plan was simple but effective. Make the aliens think he was trapped and confused while he silently climbed to higher ground. His mind worked quickly, calculating angles, timing, and potential reactions. Step by careful step, he moved. The dragons reacted exactly as he expected, investigating sounds and shadows while leaving safe paths open for him. Kale smiled faintly. Humans were small, yes, but their intelligence allowed them to turn impossible situations into advantages. The aliens above had mocked him, but they could not control how a human mind thought. nor could they predict the patience and strategy that defined him. As he reached a narrow ledge high above, Kale noticed that the aliens were growing restless. Their sensors swept faster, and he could sense their frustration. They had assumed he would fail long ago. They had counted on fear, on panic, on instinct, but Kale had none of these weaknesses. Humans could endure, adapt, and improvise. They could see patterns where others only saw chaos. And now, Kale was ready to demonstrate it, using gestures and subtle signals. He guided one of the dragons closer to a trap he had set. A stone clattered down a path, drawing the dragon's attention. The alien sensors recorded the movement, but the dragon's intelligence was not fully understood by the observers above. They reacted unpredictably, exploring paths, turning and creating confusion. Kale moved quickly along another ledge, climbing higher and using the chaos to shield his progress. He reached the top of the cliff, overlooking the alien ship. From this vantage point, he could see the containment devices they had used to trap him earlier. They were precise and powerful, but rigid. They could detect force, heat, or movement, but not subtle thinking. Kale smiled. Humans had always survived by exploiting what others overlooked. While the aliens focused on strength, Kale focused on strategy. Carefully, he manipulated a few control devices in the crystalline system he had discovered. Small pulses of energy flowed through the rocks, sending subtle signals to the dragons below. They responded immediately, moving in patterns that drew attention away from Kale, while creating minor disturbances the aliens could not interpret. It was perfect. Humans could combine observation, planning, and improvisation in ways the aliens had never considered. Kale's heart raced as he prepared for the next step. The dragons were now subtly following his lead. He could guide them without words, using small gestures, sounds, and movements. The aliens above assumed he was alone and helpless, but Kale had formed a network of allies no one had predicted. Humans had always survived in harsh environments not by strength, but by intelligence, adaptability, and understanding of those around them. He climbed down a hidden path toward the cliff's edge, where the alien containment systems were concentrated. Using small, precise manipulations, he triggered minor faults in their energy beams. The aliens reacted immediately, but it was too late. Kale had anticipated their responses. The dragons reacted instinctively to the disruptions, moving in ways that created diversions, drawing sensors and attention away from him entirely. The aliens' frustration grew. They realized too late that the human was not only surviving, but controlling events from a distance. Kale's combination of patience, intelligence, and subtle influence was something they had never encountered. They had mocked humans as fragile, but they could not understand the unpredictability, cleverness, and strategic thinking that defined them. Kale reached the main edge of the cliff. The dragons followed his guidance carefully, creating disturbances that masked his escape route. He used the crystalline device to amplify signals, keeping the dragons calm but responsive. Every move he made was calculated to confuse the aliens and maintain control. Step by step, he moved closer to freedom. Finally, Kale reached a narrow plateau that led away from the cliffs. From here, he could descend safely and signal the dragons for further guidance. The aliens above had no idea what was happening. They could not predict the human mind, and Kale's actions proved that strategy and intelligence were more powerful than strength or technology alone. Kale paused, taking a deep breath. The dragons below followed his lead, moving quietly but purposefully. He signaled them with a slight tilt of his head and a soft whistle. They responded immediately, forming a protective barrier between him and the aliens' line of sight. Kale moved carefully, descending the plateau, each step guided by his observations and planning. Humans could survive because they adapted faster and thought more creatively than any species that relied only on strength. As he reached the base of the cliffs, Kale looked up at the alien ship. The beings inside were watching, frustrated and confused. They had assumed victory, but humans were unpredictable. Kale smiled faintly. The aliens had trapped him, mocked him, and assumed humans were weak, but they had underestimated the one thing that made humans extraordinary: intelligence, strategy, and courage under pressure. Kale activated a final sequence on the crystalline device. Energy pulses flowed through the rocks, creating a distraction so large that the dragons moved in coordinated patterns, masking his movements entirely. The alien sensors flickered and alarms blared. Kale slipped away quietly, guided by dragons who now seemed like allies rather than threats. He had turned a trap into triumph. The desert cliffs faded behind him as he followed the dragons through safe paths and hidden valleys. He felt a deep sense of pride. He had survived the dragons, outwitted the aliens, and uncovered the mystery of the planet. Humans were small, yes, but they could think, adapt, and strategize in ways no other species could. That intelligence, combined with courage, had allowed him to triumph. By nightfall, Kale reached a safe zone far from the alien ship. The dragons dispersed naturally, but their behavior showed recognition and respect. Kale knew he had formed an unspoken bond. Humans could survive not only by adapting, but by understanding and cooperating with intelligent creatures in ways that others could not imagine. Kale paused, looking at the auroras above. The planet was dangerous, full of creatures and aliens that sought to control or harm him. But he had prevailed. The aliens had mocked him and assumed humans were weak, but he had proven otherwise. Humans were clever, resourceful, and capable of mastering challenges far beyond what others expected. He whispered softly, almost to the wind, "They thought I would fail. They were wrong." He smiled, knowing that the dragons had helped him, that his mind had guided him, and that the aliens had underestimated the very thing that made humans exceptional. As Kale prepared to rest, he realized that this adventure was more than survival. It was proof of something important. Humans could thrive in impossible situations, think creatively, adapt to danger, and even turn enemies into opportunities. He was small, yes, but he was clever, mysterious, and triumphant. The night stretched quietly around him, the stars shining in the alien sky. Kale leaned against a rock, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. He had survived traps, beasts, and enemies. He had uncovered mysteries, formed bonds, and outwitted beings far stronger and more advanced than himself. He was human, and humans were extraordinary. With a final glance at the cliffs and the alien ship in the distance, Kale whispered one last time, "This is what humans do. We survive, we adapt, and we triumph." And in the quiet of the alien night, he knew it was true. He had turned a trap into victory, danger into opportunity, and fear into a demonstration of human intelligence and courage.